without any further ado, I want to hand over to Matt Rank. Matt is the manager of virtual production for the UK and EMEA for Netflix. And he's kicking off the season for us. So over to you, Matt. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Emma. Nice to virtually meet you all. Unfortunately, I can't see all your faces, but I hope you enjoy this presentation. So yeah, we entitled this Virtual Production is Production, Beginner's Guide. I think hopefully one concept you'll get over the course of this presentation is, these are just tools that we are now using in production. So we're dropping the virtual. These are tools that you can use on a film set from today. So a quick intro. My name is Matt Rank. As Emma mentioned, I manage virtual production for Netflix across the UK and EMEA. A quick bit of background about myself. I've been involved in virtual production, what is now called virtual production, for the last kind of 18 years. Actually started off my time at Audio Motion Studios doing motion capture. That turned into performance capture, virtual cameras. I was then lucky to go work at Frame Store, where I spent a lot of time, using these techniques and looking at how we could take this from being used in a studio environment to being used on set. So spent a lot of time there, kind of digitizing, the real world, so we could view it virtually, and then taking our digital characters and allowing us to then view them, in reality back on a film set. And I carried on doing that at ILM for 7 years as well, working across, the amazing Star Wars franchise. And obviously then applying that to other kind of Disney films. And there we looked at a lot of, supervising digital units, lots of, facial 4D capture. And we started obviously playing around with LED technology all the way through to obviously spending time in LA working on The Mandalorian. And I've been at Netflix now for the last year. It's been an interesting learning curve, especially during the pandemic, but it's been fascinating seeing how all this works at a studio level as well. So just going to quickly touch on what virtual production is at Netflix. We split it up into 5 categories. So we have world capture, so that's your photogrammetry, LiDAR, drone photography. So basically that's us, going around either with stills camera or, laser imaging, distance measuring equipment to digitize a world environment we're in. It could be a set of mountains, it could be a forest, it could also be a set that's been built on set. And the idea for doing that is we can take that, turn it into an asset that we can then put onto the computer, and then we can then visualize in real time. So that moves us on to visualization. We can take these, assets we've captured from the real world. We can jump into VR to view them. We can use, virtual cameras to scout, to explore, and we can do this collaboratively, all in real time together. And that's just something that's taken off, obviously, quite quickly the last couple of years with the, with the pandemic, allowing people to kind of remotely work together to still explore, work on their film ideas and concepts ahead of actually getting back to shooting. Performance capture, as mentioned before, the Avatar and Planet of the Apes and Star Wars, that's very much capturing the likeness or the performance of an actor. Obviously, once again, we can now do this more in real time. We can do higher fidelity, higher detail in real time. And then that moves on to simulcam. And simulcam is basically taking CG content and displaying that back into a camera feed, back into a monitor on set, so that your DP, your director, your actors can see what that digital version might look like, in the final comp. And then interactive lighting, that's obviously where I think everyone's thinking about virtual production right now, and that's taking, LED screens, be it pre-rendered content in 2D, be it 3D scenes that we can move around, and using that to then be the backdrop to your camera, but also then to light and provide reflections to your actors on set. And we'll go through a few more examples of these in the presentation in a little bit. So where does virtual production sit? I like to think that virtual production sits between all these different disciplines. It can't exist without the VFX crews that we work with to generate the content. It needs to be tied in, closely with production in terms of scheduling, set builds, etc. And then I think creative as well. I think the nice thing about these tools is it allows, your directors, your DPs, your production designers to, have more input on what's going to happen later on in the film, or especially the heavy VFX film. They actually get to commit their intent and what their vision, much earlier on in the process. So these virtual production tools kind of bring all of this together to allow people to realize their vision. And virtual production can sit anywhere across the production. To get the best efficiency though, it's really good if you can, take the assets you've worked with maybe early on in pre-production in your art department. If you're able to then use them as your visualization on set, if you're able to use them on your LED screen for your cameras, and if you then take it through the final post for any additional shots, that reuse is where you can get real efficiency. But this little diagram here, courtesy of Epic Games, just kind of shows that the tools can sit anywhere along this chain. And just to touch on my role at Netflix within the studio. So at the studio level, our main role is to educate. It's to educate internally. It's to work with the creatives and directors, the story writers that we want to attract, help explain to them what the technology can bring to the table. We look to demystify and de-risk that as well. And that leads on to titles. On actual shows, we kind of act more as consultants. We try and identify what opportunities, what technologies could work for titles. And we try and then make sure that everything is set up with our cross-functional partners to make sure we're set up for a successful show in terms of imaging, technology, and direction. And then at the industry level, we're working quite hard at the moment to capture all of these learnings, to help define standards, to make these techniques simpler, easier. So we're looking to help aid adoption and reduce barriers to entry. And kind of the end goal is to make virtual production accessible to everyone, anywhere, at any budget. And to lose the virtual bit, it would just be production. So what does virtual production bring to the table? I think we'll touch on this again towards the end of the presentation, but I think there's a few things to think about as we move through some of these examples. Obviously, look-wise, if we're bringing interactive lighting into a set, that allows us to light our sets better, get all the refractions, all the reflections in glasses on surfaces. It's much better than trying to remove a blue screen comp look potentially. And then the same with performances. If you're standing on a set and you can see the vista you're meant to be looking at, you can see the scope or the scale of the environment that you're actually performing in. I think can really help elevate your actors' performances. And that also then goes for composition as well. I mean, a great DP will make amazing shots out of whatever they're given. But if they're able to see what that final shot may look like once it's been through visual effects, to see that once again the size of maybe the spaceship they're trying to frame up on, they can obviously start choosing their shots carefully there as well. It also gives them a lot of control as well in terms of lighting, being able to shoot at magic hour, all day long, rather than just having to wait for that short window out in the real world. Obviously, a big topic at the moment is sustainability. Obviously, if we can reduce the amount of travel that's needed on some of these shows, or less crew travel, if we can also build smaller sets because we can digitally extend them on the LED walls as well, potentially there's savings there. So it's something that we're actually investigating at the moment, trying to see how that can affect productions. I think editorially as well, I think if you can capture that intent in camera on set and take that into the edit, it allows the edit to breathe, allows them to cut together the story they want to tell without just having blank kind of placeholders saying there'll be some effect here, some visual effects here. I think that can be really helpful. Same goes for producibility. We have shows that have been impossible to make until this, not impossible to make, they've been financially unviable to make or schedule until this technology has come along. And we have examples there where with lots of world traveling shows, locations that are very hard to go to. But once again, this technology might make that accessible. Access is a big one as well. It's allowing, we're keen to allow small productions as well as big productions to have access to this technology, see what it can bring to their story. And then I think the key one we like to stress as well is collaboration. And just to touch on that a bit more, I think one of the biggest keys to success is to collaborate, and to collaborate early. And by that, we kind of mean bringing together all the different disciplines that help run, operate all the heads of departments you would find on a film set. because they can all benefit and they can all bring their own knowledge as well. So for example, one of the key roles I think when it comes to LEDs in virtual production on shows like The Mandalorian and some other examples we'll touch on in a moment is the production designer, because they're really there trying to work out what are you going to build physically versus what you're going to build digitally, and then they can obviously help kind of join those worlds seamlessly with set deck, dressing, etc. I think alongside them, the director of photography is really, really important as well. You need to understand how you're going to light this digital content, and that has to match the lighting you're going to find on set. Obviously, they're working very, very closely with your kind of VFX team as well, because obviously they're the ones generating the content most of the time. And obviously, the showrunner director understanding their intent with the title, how far they want to push it is important. Work with the line producer and UPM to look at schedules, budgets. I think it's really key then to work with the locations manager as well, because you may find that, if they're doing early scouts of different locations for the film, then maybe they can go and do some roll capture whilst they're there, and everyone can start viewing that, back at base to understand, what locations they need to travel a whole crew to, which ones maybe only need a plates unit, for example. So all that's really, really useful. And I think where we're trying to get to on a studio level as well is obviously working with the writer's room as well, because if you can identify areas that really lend themselves to these techniques, you can help there as well for them to understand how much scope they can write into the process. And then once again, as mentioned before, editorially, I think it really helps them to understand all the footage, all the dailies coming in, and how all of that will come together so they can work more efficiently. So just to touch on a few examples. The Midnight Sky was a show that I was actually still at ILM, but we were doing for Netflix with George Clooney. And obviously this film is, a lot of it is set in the Arctic. And obviously they went out and shot plates and locations, but the idea was how could we bring that back to a studio environment for them to perform in. So just to touch on world capture, we mentioned it earlier. So we went out and we took photographs, we used drones to basically digitize the glacier. We were going to set this on. We also took cameras out there so we could shoot array footage of the skies, so we could come together an asset that we would then view back out of those windows on set. Virtual scouting was a tool that was used. We could obviously taken those environments we just showed you and jumped in there with virtual cameras and VR. But here Martin Rule, our DP, was exploring the spacewalk sequence they were looking to shoot, and the idea there was to basically work out. Well, they wanted to work out what parts would they would film in camera practically with the actors, which bits would be fully digital shots. So this really helped them kind of work out a playbook of what they needed to capture on set. And then obviously the in-camera VFX, the LEDs, which gets everyone excited at the moment. We surrounded the entire set with big LED walls. Covering 142 feet long, so we could get those views and those vistas out across the set, across the snow and the ice and the mountains. And here's just some examples. It was a really successful shoot. We were able to move the camera around internally. We were tracking its 3D position, so the perspective would shift. Obviously, we had an 8-year-old actor on stage with us as well, so for them to be able to really feel like they were there in that environment was key. There's also a lot of digi-double or facial placement work, so touching back on performance capture for some of the spacewalk sequences, and even some of the scenes I think you would expect to be shot in camera were actually fully CG. And obviously the example bottom left in the airlock is a key one. It's a key one there that was actually a full CG shot. And to touch on, there's a show called 1899 shooting in Germany right now. That's obviously from the creators of Dark. It's another Netflix show we've been heavily involved with, and they've taken this technology and they've really started to evolve it. Something that's been coming out in the press recently is talking about the turntable they have deployed there. They have the ability to rotate their sets 360 degrees. That's brought some real efficiencies to the way they shoot. They no longer move the camera and the lights. They, to shoot reverse shots, they actually just rotate the world they're in. So that's been super useful. We have there's so much we can talk about it. Very excited about it, but there's a few images that have been released recently by American cinematographer. Once again, just showing the LED wall set up and the set pieces, and then some more examples of how much you can reduce your set build They no longer need to go out on an ocean liner. You're able to shoot this in the studio. And that's once again talking about how a show became producible, especially in the pandemic. There was no way they could have done this without kind of taking on this approach. And there you go, so just some of the shots and the imagery. Yeah, it was really, really beautiful. And yeah, we're super excited for when it comes out. A little while to wait yet though. And obviously they have their studio in Babelsberg. It's one of the biggest stages that's available for any shows, any productions to use within Europe. So yeah, if you're interested in that as well, feel free to reach out. Some different examples. Obviously, this is we're using an awful lot of this technology for driving comp work. Mank was obviously a good example of this. That was another really interesting show because obviously it's actually CG content. They went down to loads of reference, but obviously LA looks very different now to how it did back then. So a lot of this is CG, and they've generated the content to play back on the LED walls for them to shoot in camera. So just some examples there. Another one here as well is Biohackers. This was a show we shot in Germany, once again using the LED screens for this train sequence. Obviously, you can see you get all the all the motion, all the movement, you get all the interactive lighting as well coming through. And obviously, if you're doing this with digital green screen, it's a challenge to clean up. And this was another show that we shot actually multiple locations around Europe using LED screens. So we could kind of give the story of different times of day, different locations. And once again, this was kind of 2D imagery that was put in the background, but provided vistas out of these windows. And just to talk about it around the other way, a lot of people talk about LED screens as in-camera visual effects. I think this example here, if you look at the bottom clip, it's showing a real world, but with a CG character. So that's something as well we do an awful lot of. We have a show right now that's shooting with about 6 tracked cameras, 15 characters. That's all being comped live in real time with on real sets with real crowd, real actors and performers as well. But yeah, what's happening here, obviously, if you look through it, you have the camera plate. We're tracking the position of that in real time with a simulcam solution, like an NCAM, MOSIS, setup, vanishing point, for example. And then obviously we have our actor, he's in an accent suit in this example. It could be mocap, it could be in a Roku suit, for example. Then obviously all that's comped in real time so that the directors, the actor, the DP can actually make sure their shot is filmed correctly, got the right angle. The SFX can be timed as well. Yeah, just another example of virtual production, but turned on its head. What do people forget? So I think the schedule is an important one, and obviously we've touched on there some very complex shows, as in like 1899 and The Mandalorian, as well as some simpler kind of shows like Criminal in terms of what they need to achieve on a complex show. I think people maybe don't realize how much prep time is needed, and that is it's not just obviously building the LEDs and the panels. A lot of it comes to deciding what that content should look like. So on a big show, we really want to be engaging 40 to 50 weeks out from principal photography, and we'd really love to see assets and decisions being made 25 to 30 weeks out as well. So that's obviously an example of a complex example. Some of the driving shots, potentially you're looking at 8 weeks in terms of just working out your approach, allowing time to go shoot plates, stitching the plates together as well, making sure they're all conformed before doing playback on the LED walls. And obviously there's now quite a few facilities you can just walk in to do this as well, to capture your driving comps. And I know Emma will mention some of them later as well. I think the other thing is cost and budget. Everyone always asks, how much does virtual production cost? I don't like to put a number on it. What I like to say is you potentially need to think about reallocating your budgets. So that's what this slide here is trying to portray. For example, you might spend more on your virtual worlds and your virtual art department, but that potentially means you can reduce your set builds. The same goes with under travel. Potentially, you can send limited crews on location, capture wide establishing shots, and to digitize those environments. And that means you save money on traveling the rest of your crew's units to these locations. You might spend more on the stage and the LED panels, but hopefully you can achieve more efficient shooting days. Hopefully you can do more setups faster, turn around quicker. And obviously as well, maybe you reduce the number of stages you have to hire as well. So rather than saying virtual production saves you money, it costs you more money, I think you need to think about reallocating the money you have to understand how you can start using this technology. I think it's also worth noting we are using a lot of cutting edge technology with this. And I think it's worth setting realistic expectations as well when you're using it to the crews you're working with. It's amazing. On something like 1899 or Mandalorian, you could reload in the background. You could take them to a whole different world within 5-10 minutes by reloading the content digitally. But as soon as it takes more than 10 minutes, your ADs will start asking why it's taking so long. I think it's compared to obviously them having to travel to a different stage or a different location, it's obviously much quicker. But yeah, we still work with technology. I think that's key as well. There's obviously an awful lot of new roles that are being mentioned on set. New crew members. So understanding what the roles and responsibilities are, how they work in the whole kind of film ecosystem as well is really key to help with education to explain, so that everyone knows what is expected of them and vice versa. And I had to add this as well. As I say, we work with computers, and it really is. You do get that question an awful lot of time on set. Have you tried turning it off and on again? And sometimes that is the solution. That's what it takes to fix it. But I think people just need to be accepting of the complexity that we are potentially bringing onto a film set with some of these tools. So our goals, how this works at Netflix is, we mentioned earlier, we want to set our own titles up for success. We want to capture all the learnings from that as well. There's an awful lot of experiential learnings, understanding how we can do it better. With that, we want to work with obviously the wider industry to reduce the barriers to entry, to make it more, quicker, faster, easier, cheaper to use this technology, and hopefully that obviously then ends up with increased adoption. I think as well from the studio side, we are always keen investing, time, not as money, but time into new technology, into education, experience, and knowledge. And our real goal is obviously support and foster the creative industry for the long term. We don't want this to be a flash in the pan. A lot of the work we are doing is setting up, new kind of ecosystems in new locations with new learnings. And we want that to carry on growing and to help, foster that creativity, across the whole of UK or Europe, across the world as well. And just to touch back on these ones as well, I hope from looking at a few of those examples, you can see kind of what, I look back at that original question, what does virtual production bring to the table? Obviously, there's an awful lot of content I would love to be able to show you. We can't release yet, and I think that will really kind of highlight some of those points in terms of especially look and composition. There's some beautiful imagery being shot out there right now. And obviously touching on again, the key to success is collaborating. It's collaborating with all your peers, the heads of departments on a film set to understand what is needed. Just touch on the Mandalorian again. It was, there was basically a gentleman's agreement between the DP, the visual effects supervisor, the production designer, that they would work together. They'd all win, a third of the battles, and then work with each other to make sure that each shot, each setup was a success. It takes a team to do this. And obviously, the earlier you can start those conversations, the better. And obviously, just some note then of some of the key HODs that you should be involving in these processes. And then just to kind of end there, there's also some additional resources that us at Netflix are supporting. We're working quite closely with VSS to provide resources online. I think Rebecca and Emma might put these out in the chat for you to click through to. We also have our own kind of 2D in-camera VFX field guide for our productions to follow, which gives some useful information on best practices, etc. As always, this is always evolving. The technology here is moving so fast. So yeah, it will go out of date quick, but I think the principles behind it will stay true for a long time. but yeah, I hope that was insightful. But yeah, I'm sorry if I ran through it really, really quickly, but any questions, let us know.
Hi, Matt. Hopefully I'm coming online again. Thank you. That was absolutely stunning. Yes, we have got some great questions, which I'll put to you in a minute. But just as you said, Rebecca is now furiously uploading those resources that you mentioned into the chat. But to reiterate, somebody else had asked in the chat, how could they go back over this amazing presentation? But just to reiterate, we have recorded this. We will need to do some editing and subtitling and whatnot, and we will have it up on our website just as soon as we can, along with the resources that Rebecca's putting in the chat, which Matt so kindly put up. So Matt, I think one of the questions that's come up is people are obviously really interested in either coming into this industry to work in virtual production, having been in a completely different job role, but also upskilling. So I wonder if you could maybe, for somebody who's not been in the industry, is there an area of virtual production that you think they could focus on, because you know there's a real shortage of people?
Yeah, I mean, Emma, I know we've been talking an awful lot about how we can, work with industry to help upskill, and also, looking at it from grassroots, upskilling, existing disciplines as well, cross training as well. Because I think the key thing to understand with a lot of this technology is a lot of it is using, approaches that have been used for many, many years, but we're putting new technology on it. So I think what we can learn from existing filmmakers and HODs and cross-pollinate that with new skills is very, very important. I think that will give us the highest level of success. I mean, right now, in terms of kind of skills, I mean, obviously there's an awful lot of resource. I mean, obviously Unreal has kind of really, really helped in terms of be a bit of a standard. Before Unreal came along, there was 10, 20 platforms you could potentially be looking to do this work in, and they were the barriers to entry were very high. They were very expensive. Epic has worked very hard to promote learnings and materials. So also that's on the content side and the operation side. There's other companies as well, like the Skies out there, who do an awful lot of the playback, etc. They have an awful lot of resources as well in terms of online guides that you can access, and you can literally learn from home right now. But to touch on any particular areas, I mean, it's kind of all areas. It's people who understand the technology. It's people who can help generate the content that goes on the wall. It's having a keen eye. It's having a keen eye and a passion as well to go with that. It's can be long hours. It's not always glamorous. But yeah, I think there's an awful lot of fun to be had.
Thank you. And somebody specifically mentioned training if you're in cameras and sound to move across to do more work in virtual. And maybe I can jump in there and say we are beginning to start offering training for those particular departments. And there will be, I'll mention again, but there would be a specific webinar which we'll do in the next 2 months, which will look specifically at upskilling and reskilling and trainings to come into the industry in virtual. Somebody, and I think you touched on this, Matt, but saying you're in this for the long haul, but somebody was asking, do you think that the pandemic has been the main driver in virtual production? And when we all hope we all get back to normal, do you think people will drop away from this technology and go back to the old days?
Well, hopefully from the presentation, I mean, virtual production has been around in many forms, for at least 20 years. I think we're expecting that we can see we are working on what the next technology might look like as well for the future. Everyone has their ideas and visions of where it could grow to. I think you're right. I think the pandemic, obviously, we had an awful lot of people reaching out wanting to know if this was a silver bullet that could help, save them, could allow them to continue, filming during it. But I think from the lessons learned, from the experiences we've heard, that it is here to stay. I think the technology will evolve, it will improve. There's an awful lot more scope for that to happen as well. So I think with that, I think we've piqued everyone's interest with what's happened so far. We want to kind of capitalize that and keep growing this moving forwards.
Cool. I've got a very specific question from Babelsbergland, which is how did you create the pitch on, or how did they create the pitch on the role on the ship?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, that was all in the content. You know, the fact that, you know, you can animate the content to make it feel like, you know, you're at sea. We joked early on asking if anyone was getting seasick, if anyone felt, you know, disorientated out there on deck. But yeah, there wasn't any kind of motion control on the actual boat itself. Everything was done digitally through the content.
Really interesting, fantastic. Lots of people are saying, and I know this is Matt and my not daily chat, luckily for Matt, but could you run through some of the new roles that you see emerging on set that when you're doing a virtual production shoot?
Yes, yeah, of course. I mean, we are finalizing a guide actually with the VES right now to try and kind of standardize some of these role types and names, because there's lots of different phrases being used out there in industry, and we're keen to kind of, you know, make it a little easier for people to know what it is a certain role is. I mean, there's terms you will hear out there an awful lot, like brain bar, that was be termed on The Mandalorian. And I mean, just to talk about the brain bar is generally the crew that, you know, running the content that goes up onto the LED wall. So when it comes to kind of roles, we have people who are good at making the content, people who are good at manipulating and altering that content in real time. We have crews who are, you know, out there helping to try and, you know, work with the camera department to make sure we're capturing where the camera position is, with the camera hardware we need to put on there. And obviously we have people on the floor as well. We have, you know, virtual production supervisors working closely with VFX supervisors as well to help, you know, inform them any of the technical issues, challenges, etc. that are happening. So yeah, they're some of the main ones, is, you know, from the content creation to the on-set operation. But yeah, we'll hopefully have a definitive naming guide for some of that. But yeah, there's lots of areas to get involved with. And I think as well, something actually I should have touched on and mentioned was that we're very, very keen as well to get some of these tools back in the hands of the, you know, departments that traditionally would be using them on set. So, you know, we want to be able to hand over, you know, a virtual lighting desk to our gaffer, you know, desk lighting up, for example, so they can start controlling home what input, because a film production, TV production, it takes a team, it takes a small army to pull off, and we don't want to be that limiting factor. We want to be able to utilize everyone on set to help make this work.
Exactly, and I think again, we will in a few weeks' time to touch specifically on these areas, and we at ScreenSkills are doing work on exactly, and I'll ask you a question about post-production in a minute, which is coming up in its larger sense. How has that been affected? But I think we're learning as we go along what jobs actually, once the first AD has learned how long or how short it takes to move something across, to reset, then that's their skill. Their day-to-day job doesn't change hugely because of it. Great question from someone, which is, are there types of environments that you've discovered don't work well for virtual production?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's not just the environment, but it's also the shot type and the intent. You know, for example, something that's quite hard to make work really, really well, it's very organic, you know, environments. We have lots of, you know, trees, leaves, you know, movement, etc. If you were shooting that quite close up with lots of, you know, fog and smoke in the background, you could get away with it. If you're trying to do a large establisher of somebody emerging out of the woods, then you're going to be, you know, you'd be better off shooting that for real on location, for example. But no, I mean, I think we are surprising ourselves. There are environments we feel will be challenging. We've had quite a few shows where we felt like it would be difficult, and in the end, once again, the production designer and the cinematographer have come up with some great solutions to actually make it look great in camera. So yeah, that's been a real surprise as well.
Cool. Question that comes up, and certainly I was asking it and have been asked it plenty. Does jumping into virtual production reduce your post-production time overall and budget, I'm sure?
Yes, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think when we talk about virtual production, we are keen to stress that, you know, we want to fix a lot of these problems in pre. We want to bring some of that work up front. I think what I'm keen for it to achieve is, if you can tick off, if you can tick off all those shots that would be, you know, the slow, you know, green screen comp replacement ones for your close-ups, etc. If you can get all them in camera, if you can then save your time and budget for them, you know, working on the bigger, wider, the more fantastical, you know, shots. Once again, I think it's a reallocation of time and budget. It's not necessarily reduced in post. And I think we're really keen to use this technology. If you can, once again, set that intent in what you're doing, even if the shot's not final, if the intent has been set, or, you know, it means the VFX company can put all that time and effort into just making that the best version of that shot, rather than having to provide, you know, 10, 20 different versions to try and understand what the director actually wanted on the day. So I think that's, yeah, hopefully it actually just increases the quality of work that we're able to produce.
Great. I have a couple of lighting focused questions, which is, does using LED walls replace translights? And yeah, pretty much the same. Does using LEDs when you're replacing a location kind of remove the need for additional lighting?
Yeah, yes and no. A lot of it will depend on the kind of LED environment you go into, the kind of construction. Some of the larger ones that are, you know, been built, which are kind of 360 wraparound ceilings and walls, obviously they give you a really beautiful overall lighting. And if you're doing, you know, if you're shooting something that's highly reflective, then you're going to be best to kind of stick with that. But if you're using kind of partial walls, also there's no, you know, you can use supplementary lighting to help light actors, you know, to actually, you know, to make sure we're getting the correct skin tones. The quality of these LEDs is, you know, they're not the best yet. They are getting better. So the color science behind them isn't as well formed as what you get from traditional lighting fixtures. And yeah, and there's still a place for translights. For example, if you're shooting a scene through, you know, heavy snow and fog, and you're not going to see the distance, just having translights and, you know, gradients across that will, you know, give you a similar effect. You don't necessarily have to go all the way to LEDs for that. So yeah, it's once again, it's not a one-fit-all solution, but yeah, using the right places, it can really help elevate those shots.
Fantastic. Somebody's been asking, and I know we all know the worlds of NDAs and the rest of it, and this is not specifically for Netflix. Are there examples where people can go and see and perhaps wouldn't have known that virtual production is being used, or some of the techniques?
Is that in terms of?
I mean, I suppose, hey, The Mandalorian, but looking beyond that, more current or even UK based productions that are out there and are now pointing to the fact that they used virtual production techniques to produce the shows.
Yeah, there are. I mean, as I said, I'm not sure what ones we can mention. We're aware of a lot. Obviously, there's an awful lot we're making at Netflix. We're aware of obviously what the other studios are doing as well. I think virtual production is interesting. A lot of time visual effects, it's not always promoted that stuff's been done with visual effects, which, you know, when I've worked on the other side, that's always been a bit of a shame, you know, the amount of work that's gone into it. Saying that, if somebody watched a show and they never realized visual effects had been used, then it kind of showed that we were doing our job. But, you know, if they didn't believe that, obviously there has been a lot more promotion, I think, around virtual production, when it's come to like behind the scenes, etc. So I think a lot of that will become more visible, but always, yeah, hopefully the end viewer never knows what technique was used, as long as they just enjoy the content. Yeah,
and then a couple of questions have come in about are you aware of these techniques being used in documentaries at all? And also, obviously, we're talking a lot about the big shows, The Mandalorians, the 1822s. How soon do you see this being accessible, or even now, to the smaller productions?
So two great questions there. Yeah, I mean, obviously, when we're talking about this internally at the studio, yes, we're using this across non-fiction. We're using this across live action, light entertainment shows as well. There's a lot being used in documentary space, and then not just the LEDs. Looking at some of the virtual cameras and the performance capture techniques, being able to block, to very quickly block, an animation pass, for previs, it's very, very powerful. So we're doing a lot of that as well. So, and that obviously won't ever be in final pixel, but if it once again sets that intent, and the artist can spend more time on that one version rather than have to do multiple versions, then they're big wins there. And then, sorry, just the second part of that question again, Emma, please.
Smaller productions, smaller budgets. Yeah, that was it. Smaller budgets and documentaries. And yeah, do you see, is there evidence of smaller productions being able to access it? But you mentioned that. I mean, I would say from my point of view, virtual production has been picked up hugely by commercials. So you can look at it one way or the other. Obviously, they're in a very unique position because they know they've got it short and they know the beginning, middle, and end right up front. But there are lots, I know myself, coming up all around the country, virtual production studios and facilities, which are really modest in scale because they don't need to be huge, do they? Because you've got such perspective through the LED wall. So it's worth looking around, and there are definitely facilities out there to attract, you know, the more kind of modest productions.
Yes, yeah, of course there are. Yeah, we are utilizing them across, you know, and that's the nice thing about Netflix. We have our tentpole pioneer titles all the way through to our, you know, some of the smaller, you know, local language, you know, titles as well. We're working at across all of, you know, across all of the regions as well. You know, in EMEA, and obviously the budgets there are very, very different to the budgets here. So yeah, no, we're working. Yeah, scale factors of 100, I think, probably between the, you know, the smallest and the largest productions, but we're trying to find a fit for all of them.
It's a great question from somebody asking about what would be your ideal collaboration with a director showrunner, for example, doing period dramas on set. I suspect that question might be more about, which is obviously a world I know quite well, how do you cope with the UK's usual delivery of scripts coming in chunks of 2 or 4, and not necessarily using the showrunner model, but using block directors and episodic writers. So you don't always know everything you need right up front.
Yeah, that is a challenge. That's one of the biggest learnings I've had actually coming across from, you know, predominantly film into series and high-end TV is that different approach. I think that's something I mentioned. I think that's potentially why the production designer ends up being your best friend, because they are then generally that consistent across them. And the same with locations and, you know, and UPMs, it's understanding those different places you can travel. Yes, you may have different directors, different DPs, for example, but if the learnings are all there and the sets are built correctly. But no, yeah, we're looking at it for, you know, for some of those titles, well, not titles, genres that you mentioned right now.
Yeah, I think, and you know, from my point, I think it's going to have to drive. This may be good news or bad news to other people at this, but it's going to drive the earlier delivery of scripts potentially. And getting execs and networks and production companies and broadcasters on board earlier. So yeah, now there's some really technical questions, which I've been avoiding, but I think it'd be great to ask a few. Has it taken time for the art department to learn how to match foreground elements with background elements? Can you, and also what would be really interesting would be for you to elaborate on how you've seen the art department start to work with the virtual art department and how they're intersecting.
Yeah, no, it has been a fascinating journey. Yeah, understanding, obviously, you know, so very, very early on. I mean, some of the best examples I think of where virtual productions work well is where you're taking a real world, you're digitizing a real world environment, using that as a base. So you've already kind of grounded yourself in a real world location in reality. And then you start augmenting that with, visual effects, with digital assets, etc. On something like Star Wars, that's very easy to do in terms of, obviously, there's an awful lot of visual clues, language that is consistent across those worlds. But so yeah, I think working with an art department, art director, to understand their vision, to understand what parts are, reality you're going to capture, what parts are going to be assets that are going to be built. We work closely with art departments in terms of them building, miniatures and bigitures, and us actually then using photogrammetry, that world capture process to digitize them. So then we are capturing all the nuances of, the work they've done into the digital assets. What still then happens, obviously, you take that all onto set, and maybe the sand that's been laid down on the set for real doesn't match the sand that you had in your CG asset. And that's obviously then when the brain bar, for lack of a better term, with those artists will get involved, and they can obviously start putting, what we call them color correction volumes onto the LED wall, so you can basically fade off the color so it matches. It feels like it joins seamlessly between the two. But yeah, so there's a lot of, it is a round trip process there, totally. And sometimes it comes down to the art department having to repaint, redecorate, sections on set to help blend that in as well. So yeah, there's digital solutions and physical real world solutions.
I mean, that's quite interesting because you touched on sort of colorists there, that actually there are that areas of traditional old post-production which are being brought forward as well. So the colorists and the grading world potentially are having to address those things up front as well, whereas they were always.
Yeah, and it's worth highlighting that as well. I think it's virtual production until we start doing some of this on a few of those earlier shows, last kind of 5-10 years. It was all for visualization. It was all for setting intent. It was pre-viz, on-set viz, post-viz. None of it was ever final pixels. And that's what's been the biggest change with the acceleration, the quality of the LED panels, the computer processing, the camera tracking. But with that, obviously comes a new set of skills as well. Having an amazing comp suit standing next to me when we were, prepping, setting up for Mandalorian was crucial to the success of that show, because then they were looking at it in terms of that final image, that final grade.
I suppose that's the amazing thing about using this technology, is you're bringing people together who've never worked together potentially before, and that allows for new ideas and new types of people coming from different backgrounds. But also, do you think that's challenging for people who've always been in a nice snuggly warm post-production suite somewhere with Diet Coke and posh coffee on tap to suddenly be on the floor?
It's a different world. We've touched on this in the past in terms of educating, these new artists, these new roles. What is, how a film set works, what's required of them. Also, then educating as well for ADs and HODs how they interact. But yeah, no, it is very, very interesting. From my personal experience, it's kind of 50-50. Some people love the thrill and the excitement. Other people prefer the office, and both environments can be hard and tough, but in very different ways.
And actually, it's bringing those something we were talking about with a colleague last night. It's bringing the office very much to the exciting bit of the shoot, rather than it always just being with the actors and in cold, wet location in the middle of the night. Which brings me on to a question from someone saying, do you think there's a danger that if you're creating the Icelandic wastelands, that you're going to lose something that a location can throw at you, that the performances and the shots and the director's interpretation would have capitalized on, because you're doing it again, nice, warm, snuggly studio?
Yeah, no, very much so. I think, when I explained that, I think I was comparing that to doing it against just a blue or a green screen. Obviously, we're obviously going to elevate the experience past that. You obviously will get that best moment, that best shot would be shooting it there for real on location. I think that brings in the producibility part of that as well. I know many a show that has intended to do that, and they come back a week or two later and unable to get the shots due to having the weather, safety issues, etc. So I think it's looking at it in balance. If you can shoot that and you can guarantee that, then that will be the best version. But if you need the next best version, then potentially this technology can help you as well.
Here's a sort of very different kind of question, and it may not be something that you're aware of. And I think we're doing a session later I know we're doing a session later in the run, but are you seeing camera equipment companies, lighting equipment companies actually having to extend, for want of a better word, the range of the kit that they hire out? Or is it tending to come from specialist areas, specialist virtual production tech?
I think the majority is still coming from specialist areas, but then there are partnerships forming between those traditional rental houses. Some are doing more in-house. It really depends on the size and scale. I think, as I mentioned before, this technology is changing so fast, and I think there's an awful lot that the specialists can learn from the traditional processes, equipment suppliers, and vice versa. So I think we'll see those worlds, getting closer together as we move forwards with this.
Thank you, Matt, so much.
Thank you for having us, and I hope it was useful for those who could join us.
was amazing. Thank you so much on behalf of everybody else. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day, all. Take care.